For 30 years, Johnny Carson welcomed the biggest names in Hollywood onto his couch, smiling, laughing, making America fall in love with them all over again. But the moment the cameras cut to commercial, that smile often vanished. According to those who worked closest to him, Carson kept a private list. Stars he considered impossible, difficult, sometimes even dangerous to be around. Today, we're revealing what really happened behind the scenes with 9 legendary names. The side of Hollywood's golden age the cameras never showed you. Actor 1. Joan Crawford. For decades, Joan Crawford was Hollywood royalty. An Oscar-winning actress whose name defined glamour on screen. But behind that polished image, according to multiple documented accounts, was a woman whose perfectionism bordered on obsession, and whose private behavior shocked even those closest to her. Crawford's reputation for extreme demands is well documented throughout Hollywood history. Studio records and biographers note her insistence on absolute control over every detail of her appearance. Lighting, camera angles, even the temperature of a room. She was famously particular to the point that colleagues described working with her as walking on eggshells. But the most explosive revelations came decades later, from someone who knew her better than anyone, her own daughter. In 1978, Christina Crawford published Mommy Dearest, a memoir alleging years of abuse behind closed doors. The book described a mother obsessed with control, prone to explosive rage, and starkly different from the composed star audiences adored. The allegations were shocking and controversial. Several people who knew Joan Crawford personally, including other family members and colleagues, publicly disputed Christina's account, defending Crawford's character. To this day, historians and biographers remain divided on how much of the memoir reflects reality. What is undisputed is the contrast between Crawford's meticulously crafted public persona and the complicated, sometimes turbulent private life reported by multiple sources over the years, from her demanding studio-era behavior to the family controversy that followed her death. Joan Crawford passed away in 1977, but her story remains one of Hollywood's most debated legacies. A reminder that even the most polished icons carried complexities the cameras never captured. Actor 2. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was more than a singer. He was a cultural phenomenon, a voice that defined generations, and a screen presence that earned him an Academy Award. But away from the spotlight, according to numerous biographers and journalists who covered his career for decades, Sinatra carried a reputation that stood in sharp contrast to his polished, charming public image. Multiple well-documented biographies, including work by authors Kitty Kelley and James Kaplan, describe Sinatra's connections to organized crime figures, associations that were investigated by the FBI over several decades and are part of the public record through declassified files. These reports detail a complicated relationship between Sinatra and figures in the criminal underworld, something he never fully addressed publicly during his lifetime. Beyond those connections, journalists and colleagues who worked alongside him described a man of dramatic contrasts, capable of extraordinary generosity to close friends, yet known for a volatile temper when he felt disrespected. Multiple entertainment reporters throughout the 1960s and 70s documented incidents where Sinatra's associates reportedly intimidated journalists or photographers who crossed him, behavior that became something of an open secret in entertainment industry circles. Sinatra's own family and biographers have offered differing perspectives on these stories, some defending him as a loyal, misunderstood figure shaped by a tough upbringing, others painting a more troubling picture of a man who used power and influence to control his public narrative. What remains undisputed is Sinatra's massive cultural impact, and the well-documented gap between the beloved entertainer millions saw on stage and the more complex, sometimes controversial figure described by journalists, FBI records, and biographers who studied his life closely. Frank Sinatra passed away in 1998, leaving behind a legacy as complicated as it was iconic. Actor 3. Orson Welles. Orson Welles redefined filmmaking before he turned 30. Citizen Kane, released in 1941, is still regarded by critics and historians as one of the greatest films ever made. But behind that genius, according to numerous documented accounts from collaborators, studio executives, and biographers, was a man whose towering talent came paired with an ego that made him notoriously difficult to work with. Welles's clashes with studio system are extensively documented. After Citizen Kane, RKO Pictures famously recut his follow-up film, The Magnificent Ambersons, without his approval while he was overseas. A decision widely reported to stem from tension over Welles's uncompromising creative control and disregard for studio timelines and budgets. Film historians consider it one of the most notorious studio artist conflicts in Hollywood history. Colleagues and crew members who worked with Welles across his career, in interviews compiled by biographers like Simon Callow, described a director who often dismissed collaborators' input, rewrote scripts on set without warning, and clashed repeatedly with producers over budget overruns. Behavior that reportedly made him difficult to insure and increasingly hard to finance as his career progressed. Even in his later years, appearing on television talk shows, Welles was known, as multiple broadcast historians and former television staff have noted, for taking control of interviews, steering conversations wherever he wished regardless of the format or time constraints, a habit that became something of a running joke in entertainment circles. Welles himself, in interviews before his death, acknowledged the toll his uncompromising standards took on his career, reportedly saying he'd rather make films entirely his way than compromise for commercial success, a philosophy that cost him major studio backing for much of his later career. Orson Welles passed away in 1985, remembered as both one of cinema's greatest innovators and one of its most famously uncompromising figures. Actor 4 Bette Davis. Bette Davis won 2 Academy Awards and was nominated 10 times, a record that stood for decades. She built a reputation as one of the most fearless actresses in Hollywood history. But according to numerous biographers, co-stars, and industry accounts, that same fearlessness made her one of the most formidable and at times feared personalities in the business. Davis's rivalry with fellow actress Joan Crawford is among the most documented feuds in Hollywood history, chronicled extensively in biographies, interviews, and later dramatized in the FX series Feud. Multiple first-hand accounts from the set of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane describe open hostility between the two stars, reportedly including public jabs, competitive maneuvering for award recognition, and a mutual disdain that lasted decades. Colleagues and directors who worked with Davis, in interviews compiled across various biographies, described her as famously blunt to the point of confrontation, someone who did not hesitate to criticize directors, producers, or fellow actors if she felt the work wasn't meeting her standards. This reputation for sharp-tongued honesty followed her throughout her career, earning both respect for her professionalism and reports of tense on-set relationships. Davis herself never shied away from her reputation. In numerous interviews throughout her life, she openly acknowledged being difficult, once famously stating that she'd rather be respected than liked, and that Hollywood's treatment of aging actresses had made her more combative as her career progressed. What made Davis such a compelling figure wasn't just her talent, but her refusal to soften her personality to fit Hollywood's expectations of how a leading lady should behave, a trait that made her both a trailblazer and, at times, a controversial presence on set. Bette Davis passed away in 1989, remembered as one of the most talented and unapologetically outspoken actresses of her generation. Actor 5 Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney was, for a time, the biggest box office draw in America. From 1939 to 1941, he outsold every other star in Hollywood, a child prodigy who grew into one of the industry's most enduring names across an 8-decade career. But behind that success, documented public records reveal a personal life marked by turmoil that stretched across his entire life. Rooney's personal life is among the most publicly documented in Hollywood history. He was married 8 times, a fact widely covered by entertainment press throughout the decades and frequently referenced in his own memoirs. He also spoke openly, in interviews and his 1991 autobiography, Life is Too Short, about struggles with gambling addiction that at multiple points in his career left him financially devastated despite his massive earnings. Perhaps the most significant documented chapter came late in his life. In 2011, Rooney testified before the U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging, publicly revealing that he had been a victim of elder financial abuse by a family member, a case that was widely covered by major news outlets and became a landmark moment in raising national awareness about elder abuse. Rooney's testimony was praised by advocacy groups for shedding light on an issue that affects many older Americans. Colleagues and biographers who documented his career also noted the challenges he faced adapting from child stardom to lasting adult success, a struggle common among former child actors, and one Rooney discussed candidly in later interviews, reflecting on how early fame shaped and complicated his adult life. Mickey Rooney passed away in 2014 at the age of 93, remembered both as a trailblazing entertainer and as someone whose very public struggles later in life helped bring attention to issues facing vulnerable seniors across the country. Actor Zsa Zsa Gabor. Zsa Zsa Gabor never needed a blockbuster film to become one of the most famous women in the world. With her thick Hungarian accent, glamorous image, and larger-than-life personality, she became a fixture of American pop culture, often credited by media historians as one of the earliest examples of someone famous for being famous, decades before reality television made that a genre. Gabor's reputation for extravagant demands and diva-like behavior was widely reported throughout her career, covered extensively by entertainment journalists and chat show hosts who worked with her. She embraced this image publicly, often joking about her own high-maintenance persona in interviews, turning what could have been criticism into part of her brand. Her personal life was equally public. Gabor was married 9 times, a fact she discussed openly and often humorously throughout her career, and one that was covered extensively by tabloids and mainstream press alike for decades. Her most controversial documented incident occurred in 1989, when Gabor was arrested and later convicted after slapping a Beverly Hills police officer during a traffic stop, an incident widely covered by national news outlets at the time. She served a brief jail sentence and community service, an episode that became one of the most talked-about celebrity legal cases of that era and further cemented her reputation as unapologetically bold. Despite, or perhaps because of, these controversies, Gabor remained a beloved and enduring television personality for decades, someone audiences saw as entertaining and larger than life rather than genuinely troubling, a distinction her many biographers and contemporaries frequently noted. Zsa Zsa Gabor passed away in 2016 at age 99, remembered as one of the original celebrity personalities, whose bold, unfiltered persona helped shape modern celebrity culture as we know it today. Actor 7 Shelley Winters. Shelley Winters was a 2-time Academy Award winner, known as much for her acting range as for her fiercely independent personality, a trait that, according to numerous documented interviews and accounts from colleagues, made her one of the most outspoken figures of her era in an industry that often expected actresses to stay quiet. Winters was widely known throughout her career for using talk show and media appearances to speak candidly about political and social issues, a habit extensively documented by entertainment journalists covering the talk show circuit of the 1960s and 70s. Rather than sticking to promotional small talk, she frequently used her platform to voice strong opinions, something that made her a memorable, if occasionally unpredictable, guest by her own admission in later interviews. One of the most widely reported incidents from her career occurred on a British television talk show, where Winters, in a moment covered by international press at the time, threw a drink at fellow guest Oliver Reed after he made comments she found offensive, an episode she referenced herself in interviews afterward. treating it as an example of her willingness to stand her ground regardless of the setting. In her own memoirs, including Shelley II, The Middle of My Century, Winters wrote candidly about her outspoken nature, her political convictions, and her refusal to conform to Hollywood's expectations of how a leading actress should behave, both on screen and in public appearances. Colleagues and biographers who documented her career noted that, unlike some difficult personalities driven by ego, Winters' outspokenness consistently stemmed from genuine passion about the causes she believed in, a distinction frequently made by those who worked alongside her. Shelley Winters passed away in 2006, remembered as a gifted actress whose refusal to stay silent made her both a compelling on-screen presence and an unforgettable, authentic voice of it. Actor Jane Russell. Jane Russell rose to fame as one of the most iconic sex symbols of the 1940s and 50s, starring in classics like The Outlaw and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes alongside Marilyn Monroe. But beyond her screen image, documented public records reveal a woman whose personal convictions and off-screen advocacy work were just as defining as her Hollywood career. Russell was open throughout her life about her devout Christian faith, a fact she discussed extensively in interviews and her 1985 autobiography, My Path and My Detours. She was known publicly for her conservative political and social views, which she expressed openly in media appearances throughout her career, a rarity for a major sex symbol of her era, and something entertainment journalists frequently noted as contrasting with her on-screen persona. One of the most significant and well-documented parts of Russell's legacy is her humanitarian work. In 1955, she founded WAIF, an organization dedicated to promoting international adoption, after facing her own struggles with infertility. Her advocacy helped facilitate reforms in U.S. adoption laws and remains one of her most widely recognized and celebrated contributions, covered extensively by press throughout her later life. Russell was also candid in interviews about tensions she experienced navigating Hollywood's expectations of her as a sex symbol, while privately holding more conservative personal values, a contrast she discussed on multiple occasions, describing the difficulty of reconciling her public image with her private beliefs. Colleagues and biographers who documented her career noted that Russell's outspokenness about her faith and convictions was consistent throughout her life, regardless of how it aligned with prevailing industry or public attitudes at the time. Jane Russell passed away in 2011 at age 89, remembered both as a defining screen icon of Hollywood's golden age and as a passionate advocate whose humanitarian work reshaped international adoption policy.